Welcome back to the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you all snuggled up and ready for another Lights Out bedtime story? Good, because you're in for a treat tonight. That's right. In tribute to the creator of Little Miss Books and Mr. Men Books, Roger Hargreaves, we have a series of 24 stories in 24 hours to make sure that wherever in the world you are, whatever time you go to bed, you have a Mr. Men book to listen to tonight. Book 24 of 24, the final book in 24 books in 24 hours, a tribute to Roger Hargreaves, the creator of Mr. Men, Little Miss Books. Here on the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Mr. Dizzy by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Dizzy was, to be quite honest, not very clever. If you were to ask Mr. Dizzy what was the opposite of black, he'd say, the opposite of black is, pink. He lived in a house on a hill which he'd built himself. A not very clever house. One of Mr. Dizzy's problems was that he lived in a country where everybody else was terribly clever. Cleverland. Even the birds were clever in Cleverland. Everything and everybody in Cleverland was clever. You'll never see a worm reading a book anywhere else but Cleverland. Poor Mr. Dizzy. Everything around him was so clever, it made his head spin. One morning, Mr. Dizzy was out for a walk when he met a pig. "What's big and grey and has big ears and a trunk?" said the clever pig to Mr. Dizzy. A mouse?" said Mr. Dizzy. The pig laughed sarcastically at Mr. Dizzy and went off shaking his head. Then Mr. Dizzy met an elephant, a clever elephant. "What's small and furry and likes cheese?" the elephant asked cleverly. A pig," replied Mr. Dizzy. The clever elephant laughed down his trunk. "A pig," he trumpeted. "A pig, you silly man." And off he went. Poor Mr. Dizzy. Mr. Dizzy decided he didn't want to talk to anybody else that day, so he went for a walk in the wood, where he knew that he wouldn't meet anybody. He felt very miserable about not being clever, and as he walked along, a tear trickled down his cheek. Poor Mr. Dizzy. Then in the middle of the wood, he came across a well. Little did Mr. Dizzy know that it was a wishing well. The day was warm, and so he decided to take a drink of water from the well. Mr. Dizzy drank deeply, but he was still unhappy. "Oh, I wish I could be clever," he sighed. Little did Mr. Dizzy know that whoever drinks deeply from the water at the wishing well, his wish will come true. And Mr. Dizzy had wished that he could be clever, and his wish had come true. He was clever, but he didn't know it, not yet. On the way home, Mr. Dizzy came across the elephant and the pig he had met earlier. They were telling each other about how they had made Mr. Dizzy look silly by asking him a question he couldn't answer. They were giggling and sniggering about it when they saw Mr. Dizzy approaching from the wood. "Here he comes again," giggled the clever pig. "Let's ask him another question," sniggered the clever elephant. Mr. Dizzy came up to them. "Tell us," said the clever pig, trying to keep a straight face, "what's white and woolly and goes ba?" "Why, a sheep, of course," replied Mr. Dizzy. The pig and the elephant were amazed. To tell the truth, so too was Mr. Dizzy. He suddenly felt very, very clever. It was a not unpleasant feeling. "Tell us," said the clever elephant, "what has 4 legs, a tail, and goes woof?" "How easy," replied Mr. Dizzy. "A dog, of course." The clever pig and the clever elephant couldn't understand how Mr. Dizzy had become so clever in one morning. Mr. Dizzy couldn't understand how he had become so clever in one morning either. But we know how he became clever in one morning, don't we? Now, let me ask you a question, said Mr. Dizzy to the pig. You, grunted the pig rudely. You ask me a question? Don't be ridiculous. There's no question you could ask that I couldn't answer. Really? Smiled Mr. Dizzy. Well then, can you tell me what's fat and pink and goes a tissue? What's fat and pink and goes a tissue? Repeated the pig, looking worried. There's nothing that's fat and pink and goes a tissue. Nothing, eh? Said Mr. Dizzy, and he tickled the pig's nose. A tissue, sneezed the pig. The answer is you, said Mr. Dizzy. You're fat and pink, and you're going a tissue. The clever pig looked downright, if not down left, miserable. Mr. Dizzy turned to the elephant, who, incidentally, had stopped sniggering. Now, said Mr. Dizzy, let me ask you a question. What's large and grey and goes top it? What's large and grey and goes top it? Repeated the elephant, looking worried. There's nothing that's large and grey and goes top it. Oh yes there is, grinned Mr. Dizzy. There certainly is something that's large and grey and goes top it. And he tied a knot in the clever elephant's trunk. Top it, cried the elephant, who wanted to say stop it, but couldn't talk properly with a knot in his trunk. Mr. Dizzy grinned and went home. I suppose to think that funny, said the elephant. The end of Mr. Dizzy by Roger Hargreaves. The last story in 24 stories in 24 hours in tribute of Roger Hargreaves, creator of Mr. Men and Little Miss books. Here on the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls and Mr. Dizzy's around the world. Good night.